I would say that sooner or later most of us want to use a GoPro underwater, whether it is for diving, snorkeling, jumping or just on a simple vacation by the sea. Today I'm going to tell you how I would set up a GoPro for underwater shooting. I will show you this using a GoPro Hero 8. But almost everything I'm saying today basically applies to all other versions of the GoPro as well. In addition to the settings, I will give you some general tips for optimal underwater recordings. And in case you're new here, my name is Werner, I live in Italy, and on this channel I'm doing tutorials and reviews on filmmaking, GoPro and also on other consumer cameras. And in any case, you will see a lot of beautiful images of nature on this channel. Consider subscribing if you're interested in these topics and have fun with this video. When it comes to camera settings, it is important to remember that there is not the one perfect setting that is optimal for all situations and all preferences. So today I will also try to explain the differences and advantages and disadvantages of the different possible settings. On the Hero 8 you can set presets for different situations. For this reason I will start by creating a new preset for underwater recordings. But that's already the biggest difference to older versions like the Hero 7, at least when it comes to the settings for underwater shots. If you want to set up your camera optimally, you have to first think about the right resolution and frame rate. These two settings should generally be considered together, as the possible settings for the frame rate depend on the resolution. As far as the resolution is concerned, I would generally choose 4K for underwater recordings. The GoPro offers the best quality and most importantly, you can crop the image better in post if necessary. For example, if you capture an interesting animal and want to enlarge it in post, then it is an advantage if you have chosen the best possible resolution. I would only deviate from 4K if your PC has difficulties with processing the files. It is a bit more difficult now to choose the right frame rate. Normally, I shoot all my videos in 25 frames per second. 25 because I live in the PAL region. In the States, that would be 24 frames per second. These low frame rates create a very cinematic look. This tutorial here was also shot with 25 frames per second. But for underwater recordings, I would deviate from these frame rates and choose a higher frame rate. A higher frame rate of 60 frames per second looks much more fluid and therefore creates a more realistic and natural look. And I think that such a look is better suited to capture the underwater world. The combination of 4K and 60 frames per second has a number of advantages. You get the best possible image quality, you can crop the image in post, you will get wonderfully natural looking shots, and if you want to use individual clips for a bigger project such as a travel video, you can create slow motion at 40% when your project is created using 24 frames per second. Slow motion can be advantageous under certain circumstances. It helps to stabilize the clip, and if you were only able to create a very short clip of an interesting moment, perhaps a special fish for example, you can use slow motion to extend the shot. Unfortunately, the combination of 4K and 60 frames per second also has a number of disadvantages. The GoPro in this case uses the HEVC codec. This is basically no problem, but you need a fast computer to playback and process the files smoothly. If this is a problem in your case, you could use 2.7K 60 as an alternative. On the Hero 8, the improved stabilization methods High and Boost are also not available in 4K 60. However, in my opinion, these do not play such a decisive role when shooting underwater. Another important disadvantage of a high frame rate is that it is not as suitable for low light situations. This can become a problem, especially if you use your GoPro for example for diving and want to shoot in very deep waters. It can get really dark and you should consider using a lower frame rate. 30 frames per second would be a good compromise. The result looks more fluid than with 24 frames per second and the GoPro gets more light. Now let's look at the other settings. As digital lens or field of view, I use wide. There are hardly any straight lines underwater. The distortion of the GoPro Fisher lens is almost not noticeable. In my eyes, there is therefore hardly any need to use linear, since this would also lead to a crop. I know that some people like Super View for underwater shots. In the case of Super View, the GoPro uses the entire photo-free sensor and then stretches the left and right edges to get a 16:9 image. This increases the field of view at the top and bottom. Basically, this is an interesting option. However, Super View is not available in 4K 60. There is also a very strong distortion at the edges, which sometimes looks a bit strange when shooting underwater, especially when the camera is moving sideways. I leave the Hypersmooth stabilization at on. High and Boost are not available in 4K 60 as mentioned. As for the protein settings, I always use the bitrate standard. I am aware that the high bitrate should generally be better. However, I've made several comparisons even in low light and with color grading and could not see any visible differences. However, the files will be much larger if you set the bitrate to high. I leave shutter on auto, I set exposure value compensation to -0.5. This way you prevent bright areas in the image from burning out. This can also happen when shooting underwater. For example, when the water surface is visible at the top of the image or the sun is shining on objects. As for the white balance, I must say that the GoPro's automatic white balance actually works quite well underwater. One has to consider that this special environment is very demanding for the camera's automatic. In fact, in certain cases the result is not perfect. It can also happen that the automatic changes the white balance during the recording, which could ruin your shot. To prevent this, you could set the white balance to native. This will fix the white balance and the camera will store more information for adjusting the white balance in post. This means that you still have to adjust the white balance in post, but there is more room for adjustment than with the automatic setting. So if you're willing to correct the white balance in post and always want the best possible result, choose native. In all other cases, use the automatic white balance. The ISO value determines how sensitively the sensor reacts to incident light. The higher the ISO value, the brighter the image will be. However, a high ISO value also causes noise and therefore reduces the image quality. With a GoPro, the image noise is clearly visible from an ISO value of 800. For this reason, I set ISO minimum to 100 and ISO maximum to 400. If you dive very deep and it gets very dark, even 800 can still lead to an acceptable image. From 1600 on, I think the image is no longer usable. I always set the sharpness to low. High leads to a very sharp image. However, it doesn't mean that more details are captured. Instead, the camera adds digital sharpness. The result does not look very professional and not very cinematic. You can also add sharpness at any time when editing. If you don't want to edit your videos and low looks too soft for you, you can also use medium. In terms of color, the GoPro setting creates a nice saturated and contrasty look. If you want a little more flexibility in post and want to grade the colors yourself, you can set the color to flat. Flat results in an unsaturated image with low contrast. Therefore, if I want to achieve the best results, I use flat and adjust the colors in post. If I want to use the clips directly, I use Color GoPro. Apart from the settings, I would like to give you some general tips for your underwater recordings with a GoPro. Normally, you try to keep the camera as steady as possible for a good shot or create some interesting camera movements as stable as possible. Underwater, this automatism seems to be disabled. There is always something new to discover, fishes move fast, so you move the camera very fast back and forth. The results are often bad and shaky shots. Therefore, try to keep the camera as steady as possible even underwater and make slow camera movements here as well. It is clear that certain accessories such as fins are of great help to achieve a smooth forward movement. As for the GoPro accessories, I usually use such a simple floating hand grip as a mount. This one comes with an accessories kit. It floats and the yellow color makes it easy to find in the water in case the GoPro should fall out of your hand. But there are of course also better standalone versions like the handler by GoPro. You can also use a waterproof pole, which is more suitable if you want to film yourself, for example. If you want to dive deeper, you should purchase an additional protective housing. With this, you can dive up to 60 meters deep and you can also mount filters that give you better and more saturated colors for your underwater shots. For these and other accessories that are useful for shooting underwater, you can find links in the video description. If you want to change the settings underwater, for example when diving, you basically have the problem that the touchscreen cannot be used. However, certain settings can be adjusted using the front screen. To do this, press the mode and the shutter button simultaneously. A small menu appears on the front screen. Depending on the version of your GoPro, you can change different settings here. On the Hero 8, for example, you can change the preset. You should also keep in mind that the light is crucial also for the quality of your underwater recordings. So you will get better shots with your GoPro in shallow water with good light than in very deep water with little light. Of course, it's clear that you might be able to take more interesting shots in deeper areas. So let's recap the most important statements of this video in a few sentences. About the settings: 4K for the best quality and 60 frames per second for the most natural looking shots. 30 frames per second if there is little light. Wide as field of view, hyper smooth on. Under Pro Tune, bitrate standard, shutter auto, exposure value compensation -0.5, white balance auto or native if you want to adjust the colors in post. ISO minimum 100, ISO maximum 400. Sharpness low, color GoPro or flat if you want to color grade your videos afterwards. Also make sure to keep the camera steady, use a good hand grip that floats, and don't forget that light will be the deciding factor for good shots even when shooting underwater. And that's it for today. If the video was interesting for you, give me a like as feedback, and see you next time.